we are going to spend an hour, as we do once a month, almost like clockwork, with Premier Brad Wall. This is a feature we call Ask the Premier. The Premier joins us, sometimes in studio, sometimes literally on the road if he is being driven somewhere, or he'll join us from his office at the legislature, his home base in Swift Current, or wherever it is we find him every single month. So the rules are simple. I start by asking the Premier a few things just on general issues since we last spoke, top-of-mind things, and then we go to the phones. Now, you may also want to get your questions in. You can do that by texting 306-306, tweeting at John Gormley Live, same coordinates on Facebook, or drop us an email, johngormleylive@rawlco.com. Let's go now to Premier Wall, who we find in Swift Current this morning. Premier, thanks for taking our call.
Morning, John.
Let's start, first of all, on a sad note. Reflections, Sylvia Fodor, the lieutenant governor back late 80s, early 90s, incredible athlete, curling Hall of Fame, a nuclear physicist. Did you know Syl at all or well?
Well, maybe not well, but we certainly had the chance to meet and chat. Most recently was when we announced the new Nuclear Research Center at the University of Saskatchewan, which will, among other things, hopefully help us reclaim the leadership position that we had, not just in Canada, but in the world in terms of nuclear medicine. And we had that leadership position because of her and other members of her team. How many of us, when our days are done on Earth, can have it said that 70 million lives were changed for the better or perhaps saved because of our work, because of our brilliance. And that's what her research with respect to cobalt-60 treatment meant. It was groundbreaking in the world. Women for whom cervical cancer would be, not a very good diagnosis, not a very hopeful one, were able to, obviously not a good one still, but now, of course, because of radiation treatment that stemmed from that, there's a much higher survival rate, and that was her, and obviously she was also our lieutenant governor. And for anyone who knew her, she was as much at ease in a curling rink, just chatting about the crops in Saskatchewan, and as she was about nuclear medicine and things of leadership. So, and what a remarkable person and a great leader in our province.
It really was. Just wanted to start with that because I know that you had known her socially as well as many of us did in this province. I have a ton of stuff to ask you about. I know listeners do too. You just tweeted something to the effect, because one of my first questions today is this whole question, as we've been pursuing with SaskTel, rural high-speed internet. You tweeted that you want to say something about this. What's happening on that file?
John, I have an announcement to make this morning, and I think we've also, we're sending out a press release. I think the federal government has as well. I want to start by saying, soon after our first election, we realized that there are a few organizations in the province that are as committed to the entire province as SaskTel. Here's a great company. Here's a company, a telco, that has done more for rural and remote service than any other telco would have done. And partly that's because it's at the behest of government representing the people. Partly it's because that's just the culture at SaskTel. People will know that recently, due to a spectrum change, and spectrum is simply the technical term for the facilitation or basically the right you purchase spectrum, companies do for the right to provide service. Because of a spectrum change, up to 8,000 SaskTel customers were going to lose with the service they had, and SaskTel was going to try to transition to another service that was causing a lot of concerns. And even for some of the 8,000, that transition wasn't possible. I also said after the last election, and frankly after the first one, that we want to be the kind of government that admits readily of mistakes and tries to fix them. I think the change here that was precipitated by the federal decision is one thing, but I'm not sure we were as ready, that SaskTel was as ready as we possibly could have been to provide the transitional service. And so I want to apologize to those customers and indicate to them that the federal government has agreed to extend the spectrum for a year, for another full year, and we're going to get this right. We're going to work with customers, make sure they can have a comparable service at the same price, and we'll give ourselves a year to get this right.
Okay, now, so at least you buy time with the one-year extension of the federal communications decision or Department of Culture decision. So what are some of the options then SaskTel explores in that 12 months?
Well, I should back up. Some people are critical, even our opponents are often critical of the fact that we have a pretty good relationship with the federal government. Here's why, by the way. I mean, typically when you think of the federal-provincial relationship, you think of equalization, you think of big numbers and big projects. There's a daily relationship that's required where two levels of government want to work together and deliver for Canadians. Well, we're grateful for the relationship that we have. My office called the Prime Minister's office. Our Saskatchewan MPs were very much involved in this particular issue, and they announced today the approval of this extension. So we want to thank them and note the federal government's involvement. To your question, XploreNet is still certainly very, very much a potential option here. People have had a bad experience with it, but my understanding is what will be available as a result of the satellite deployment is a much improved product. Where speed might be better, the data question for some might be an issue, and we'll want to work through all of that. But you should also know, John, that when we were in China, SaskTel signed an agreement with Huawei, a large Chinese telecom, to pilot a brand new LTE rural expansion, the next platform of technology. And that pilot will have advanced to some extent as well before this year is up. And that, so we're going to have other options to look at, other technologies potentially.
Premier Brad Wall with us. This is Ask the Premier. 1-877-332-8255. I see questions coming in both on text and Twitter. We'll get to all of them. By the way, this is me, of course, shamelessly self-promoting. You've never heard that before. It was on this program, what was it, two goes ago, when Pat Barber got a hold of you, the city police officer in Saskatoon.
It was two, yeah.
Two. So, within 60 days, in fact, you immediately said you were going to do it. Within 60 days, we now have veterans plates for motorcycles and snowmobiles. Thank you very much. And on behalf of our listeners who own this show, we want to thank you very much because it was through that vehicle that you did this, and appreciate it.
Well, John, it's quite really the opposite. I want to thank the listeners, and especially Pat, who called in. The reason that we got this job done is that someone phoned in, and frankly, after that, we were tweeting about it, and more people who heard it on the show were also tweeting about it. We got to the point where we got to. SGI made the right call, and the Minister Harpower led it, and a couple of days ago, we made a good announcement.
All right, Premier Brad Wall with us. Okay, a couple of top-of-mind items, both news yesterday. I was expecting, only because we've had consistent quarter-by-quarter growth in population, and this started back in late 06, early 07, really took off after you were elected at the end of 07. Population continues to grow. 22,000, the numbers are up in the past year. I thought we were going to hit a point where at least on one quarter it started to stabilize. Were you expecting some kind of flattening out, or has this been consistent with your expectations that we continue to grow every single year?
I think I expected steady growth, John, much as you're referencing. I think we all expected that kind of steady growth, but this was more than that. You're right. This was our strongest quarter of growth since they started keeping quarterly stats in 1971. This is now our biggest year of growth that we've had since 1921. So, even amidst some discussion, I've seen some buzz around the province questioning whether how long is the economic strength going to last. Well, apparently a little longer because of these record numbers. They were a bit of a surprise. Here's something that's very positive. 4,000 plus of the new Saskatchewan residents in this last quarterly report are international immigrants. And a lot of them would have come even after the changes that the federal government requested that were implemented as a result of Minister Kenney's request. So this is positive as well because we have, you often heard me say, John, that the government's not going to take credit for the economic growth of the province. There's many external factors at play. However, we're trying to do the right things in terms of facilitation. One change we did make was to have much bolder goals around immigration than the previous administration had, to streamline the processes for immigration, and we've seen those numbers skyrocket in the last 4 years, and they're a big part of the population story, and so it's a credit to the employers, obviously, who are creating the jobs, are entrepreneurs, but here I hope government's also been a force for good because these international numbers are big.
Premier Brad Wall with us. We get to the calls next. Many of your questions. This is Ask the Premier. I'm John Gormley, and this is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. It is Friday, and right now, this is our regular stop on what we call Ask the Premier. Premier Brad Wall here, and this is, as the name implies, your chance to put your questions to the Premier. Now, the Premier just made a fairly significant announcement here, opening not just this segment, but this entire discussion, apologizing to the 8,000 rural customers displaced by the SaskTel decisions on wireless high-speed, necessitated by the federal decision to limit the spectrum that SaskTel had, and then the Premier announcing that he has received assurances from the federal government they will extend that spectrum allocation for 1 year. So everything will stay the same for the next year on high-speed wireless, which will give SaskTel time to do something differently. How much feedback did you get on that rural thing? Was this becoming a major pushback?
There was a lot of feedback on it, and rightfully so. You know, we're going to release our growth plan in a few weeks and talk about the importance of infrastructure in our plan to keep Saskatchewan growing at the pace that it is. And that doesn't just mean highways or municipal infrastructure or health and education infrastructure. It means the new infrastructure, the new economy infrastructure, connectivity in rural Saskatchewan. I mean, we're also going to focus a lot on agriculture in that plan because increasingly it is rising to the top of importance in terms of our economic engines based on what the world's wanting, and we can talk more about the Asia mission we were on. It's quite remarkable. We have a lot of very successful businesses in rural areas that need that service, and frankly, you know, people, our residents need the service there. So we were hearing a lot more about it. Don McMorris, the minister, was working this issue behind the scenes hard for the last couple of days and identifying what might be able to be done and some of the challenges, and I want to thank him as well. He's the minister of SaskTel, and I want to thank the TEL officials as well. But we have a ways to go, but we have some time now to get this right.
Premier Brad Wall with us. Let's get to the phones now. Gordon in Kelvington, thank you for holding on, sir. Your question to the Premier.
Good morning, Mr. Premier. Approximately 1 month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I heard on the news over the weekend, it was a Friday announcement, that the government was going to spend $9.5 million a year for 3 years with the possibility of extension at the end to hire a consultant to tell them how to save money in the healthcare system. I can tell you in about 30 seconds how to do it, and it will not cost you any more than $95. If you save $5, it'll be more than what you're going to save the way you're going about it.
Okay, well, that was a question, Gordon, or I guess it was a statement too. Okay, the cost of this lean issue in healthcare, Premier.
Well, I guess I just respectfully disagree because we've actually been using consultants to lean out the system. Lean techniques is really pioneered by Toyota, the large auto manufacturing company, and now used in all organizations, government organizations as well. We've been at this for a while, and we actually have been hiring consultants, and we are saving money, and we're saving big dollars and, frankly, improving care. Lean relies not just on consultants, but on frontline workers telling the government about some common sense solutions to things. I can tell the caller we've saved $10 million in terms of leaning out how we do the inventory management around our blood inventory. I can report back to the people of the province we've saved $16 million simply leaning out the design of the new children's hospital. About that same amount for a new project in Moose Jaw. The Saskatoon Health District has saved millions of dollars in applying those same techniques to how we deal with workplace absenteeism. And so, we're going to continue with this because we think it focuses our system on the patient, on frontline care, number one. Number two, and it does save money and much more than we have to invest with the people that help that help provide these solutions. Premier
Brad Wall with us. Let's stay on healthcare for a moment. Jim in Regina, you're on with the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. I'm calling about all the bragging that went on with your waiting list going down so far. My wife's been on a waiting list since December 7th this last year. She went on to a priority list in July of this year for an ankle replacement. She phones the surgical wait list, and they basically tell her to quit phoning. It's always a month to 2 months. She comes off the phone crying. I've come home having to see her crawling into bed because she's in so much pain. She's on medication that makes her dozy most of the time.
What city are you calling from, Jim?
I'm calling from Regina.
Okay, so this is a Regina health region issue then.
Yes, it is. It's an orthopedic surgeon issue.
Okay, no, so that's a very good point. So when she deals with the wait list management people, she's not getting satisfaction?
They're abusing her. They're saying, why are you calling back so often?
Okay, Premier.
Jim, I have some very direct experience that is a lot like this. And so, we have had some success, some significant success in our wait times initiative. We know that patients waiting more than 18 months is down 92%, patients waiting more than 12 months down 82%. This is from 2007. And those waiting more than 6 months is down to 58%. All of that doesn't help Jim or his loved one. And so what I'm going to ask is that we could get his information offline here and see if we can't pursue it a little bit. We have a couple of health regions who are further behind than other health regions in our wait times initiatives for various reasons, who understand the importance of catching up, of timely care, and who are working on these things. And so we want to perhaps pursue this particular case, but I just want Jim to know that in Regina is one of those districts where they're not quite hitting the targets like the other ones are yet. They're working on it. They will. We're going to meet our objectives around our surgical wait times initiative. We were bold enough to set a goal, knowing that people would hold us accountable, like Jim, as they should, and we intend to hit those targets. We're well on the way, but we're a couple years out from the final end date of this thing, and we know in some districts we need to make more progress than is being made yet today.
Now, and you've never been afraid of reminding us what that goal is. Ultimate goal is 2014.
By 2014, we don't want anyone waiting longer than 3 months.
Now, there was talk when you first made that commitment 5 years ago that was completely unrealistic, because this was the province that routinely had 2-year wait lists. Are you on track to make a 3-month max by 2014?
We are. Our goal this year is that no one waits longer than 6 months. So 99% of the surgeries are getting done within 18 months. That's 99.6. 97% of surgeries are getting done within 12 months. 89% of surgeries are getting done within 6 months. And 78% are getting done within the 3-month target we have for 2014.
Premier, hang on for a second. Premier Brad Wall is here. More talk, more questions next on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Welcome to the Friday edition and the week's ultimate open forum convenes here at 10 o'clock. And what we're going to do, among other things, we have the week's hottest shows and a ton of other topics to get to. But I want to do a very special focus, 10 o'clock. We hear now 22,000 more people in Saskatchewan in the past year. And you go by the numbers. I was just asking the Premier about them. Impressions of Saskatchewan, if you've just come here in the last 5 years. What about Saskatchewan's been even better than you thought? What's been worse than you thought about Saskatchewan? That's coming up top of the hour. Premier Brad Wall is here. This is Ask the Premier, our monthly go with the Premier of Saskatchewan. Okay, let's get back to the calls now. 1-877-332-8255. Jack, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Good afternoon, or good morning, gentlemen. This is a question for the Premier. Mr. Premier, I'm a big supporter of yourselves, and I just want to hear your opinion on what you feel about the Occupy the Stadium protest that's going to be going on this weekend at the Rough Riders game. I know that your provincial government has been really supportive of the new stadium, and I appreciate everything you've done for the project. I feel it's such for the greater good of Saskatchewan to build new, and just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, we happily live in a country and in a province and in communities where people have the freedom of speech and freedom to associate and protest and speak out against things they don't agree with, and so obviously that's pretty important. That's part of the strength of where we all live in the fabric of our own province. So those folks that are involved in that particular protest are welcome to it. With respect to the stadium, the government's approach was to look at how we have funded other large and smaller recreational facilities in Saskatchewan over the last 4 or 5 years, and even beyond that with the previous government. We found out that roughly for each of these projects, whether it's the new arena in Moose Jaw or Estevan or even some work that happened in my hometown, it's roughly about 30% grant that comes from the provincial government. And that's what we have in this case with the $80 million grant component of the new stadium project. And then we've also indicated a willingness to provide some of the financing for this thing, knowing that it can be paid back with the premium on the ticket prices. But by far and away, the users will be paying for this new facility, a great proportion of it in terms of the riders and the fans that go to the rider games, obviously, but also the other events that will be there. And for those who've seen the design, the proposed design for the new stadium, this is a state-of-the-art facility that will it'll be transformative for our capital city and therefore for our province. I mean, it's going to make way for a great housing project where Mosaic is currently, and provide the opportunity for revitalization. I do think it's an important project. That's why we funded it. It's why we're involved in this. And I know there's different views on it. People will gather and oppose things. Those who oppose the stadium typically say, well, there's all these other needs. And I guess my point is that's always going to be the case with any recreational facility funding, whether it is a smaller hockey arena or whether it's a large football stadium. There will always be roads that need to be paved and, health care needs to be provided. We want to strike the right balance. But if we wait until all of those other things are done, no stadiums will get built, no arenas will be funded. You can make the case that arts funding, which we've increased over 30% in our first term, that funding would go to these other priorities too. So it's an entire quality of life equation that we want for the province, and the stadium is part of that, as well as other rec facilities.
Premier Brad Wall with us. One other question, when you start to look at municipalities, the other day, the main contender in Saskatoon, Tom Wolfe, running against Mayor Don Acheson, made a very ambitious downtown paving commitment, infrastructure commitment, predicated on, 1, convening a meeting after he becomes mayor with Premier Wall, 2, working out a resource royalty revenue sharing agreement with the Premier to fund the roads in Saskatoon. Your response on that?
Well, you remember, John, in the election campaign, our opponents proposed that there be a special resource revenue sharing deal with First Nations. I think it was the proposal, and we indicated that everybody in Saskatchewan deserved to share in those resource revenues equally, including First Nations, and that was our position. And I think that's what the great majority of the people of the province believed as well. That's certainly my feeling. So that would be the first comment. The second comment is that there has been a huge increase in revenue sharing from the province to the municipalities, including to the city of Saskatoon, since we took office. In 2007, 2008, John, the revenue sharing from the government to municipalities was $127.3 million. That was the system we inherited from the previous government. Then we agreed to give them 1 point of the PST, all the municipalities, and that number's now gone to $216 million is the revenue sharing number. It'll go up again this year. Saskatoon's, I think, is up over close to 100%. Obviously that's very, very significant. There's not going to be any other resource revenue sharing deals over and above that. We hope municipalities, all of them, will do what the government's trying to do in terms of finding efficiencies. We're going through a workforce adjustment program in government where we want to reduce the number of full-time equivalents by attrition over 4 years by 15%. We'd like to see those kinds of plans by municipalities to get efficient. And in the meantime, we know infrastructure needs are out there, and we're talking to municipalities about another separate program. But in terms of revenue sharing, municipalities have never had it as good as they do. They've even taken ads out to say as much. And this candidate has his platform. I respect that, but there's not going to be there's no additional resource revenue sharing. That'll be coming after the municipal election. 1-877-332-8255. Fran in White City, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Good morning, Premier Wall. I wonder, Premier Wall, if your government would seriously consider a proposal that was made by Chief Roland Crow of the FSIN last week. It was to, in a joint way, operate the excess PFRA pastures that the federal government turned over to the province this year. And he suggested that, this would be, a good thing to have perhaps a joint board do this, the people, First Nations people, maybe people from the ranching community and government to provide oversight, and rather than just sell off that excess pasture land to the ranchers that have been using it. It seems to me, we need, even though Saskatchewan is doing very well, we need to focus on some economic development, job skills, for First Nations people, and to me that seems like a great thing. You've got job skills, animal husbandry, probably the pastures are located near the First Nations people.
Fran, good question. Let's get the Premier on that, the Premier Wall.
Thanks, Fran. I think our Minister of Agriculture commented on this, and the patrons of these pastures have been there for a very long time, and doing more than just being patrons. They are also stewards of these lands and have been. And I just would find it really difficult to sort of leapfrog over them to any particular group, another group. I don't think what former Chief Crow's idea is a bad one, frankly. But I think we do need to give the first opportunity to those who've been patrons of it, and beyond that, I think we are going to be open to a number of different ideas. Obviously, the federal government is getting out of this, and it's leaving the provincial government to make some decisions, and I think all options should be on the table. But patrons, I think, need to be at the top of the list in terms of what's next.
Caller, stand by. We're going to go to the tweets as well, some of the texts. This is Ask the Premier, our monthly session with Premier Brad Wall. I'm John Gormley, only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wall is here. This is our monthly session of Ask the Premier. Okay, let's go to the tweets. A question here. If pharmacists can write prescriptions, why don't we as patients have a database where we are able to view our prescriptions? Premier Wall, question on universal health records.
You know, we're making progress on this particular front, but arguably it's a little slower than anyone would like. It's also been the subject of some discussion on the Healthcare Innovation Committee that Premier Giz and I are chairing on behalf of Canada's premiers with all the other health ministers. Because if patients are obviously more engaged in terms of their own care, we know that's a welcomed innovation in healthcare, and obviously the patients appreciate that as well. I don't have anything specific to comment on this particular piece, but I would also say this, though, John, that pharmacists are part of the scope of practice study that we're doing through this ministerial review, again chaired by Premier Giz and myself. And so we're asking, are we using all of the healthcare professionals in this country to their fullest scope to sort of ease the pressure on doctors, for example, and on other healthcare professionals and provide better care? And the pharmacy piece in terms of point of contact for patient is very much a part of that.
Before we get back to the calls, there's a great call coming up from Mary on education. This is a tweet from Mark. What are the Premier's thoughts on continuing the Prairie Shelter Belt program? Have you had some calls on that?
No, I have not, John. Obviously, it's something that I would want to maybe take back and report back on the next show in terms of what we're hearing about it or potential changes to it.
Now, that's a federal initiative. It's part of the whole
it is, but in all sort of federal agricultural areas, the province is not very much involved. So I'd want to report back on that one.
Okay, can we put that on the carry forward for next month?
Sure.
All right. So Prairie Shelter Belt program. What is the province's response in terms of feedback they're getting? Now let's go to an education question. This is Mary in Saskatoon. Mary, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Good morning, Mr. Premier. My question is the Saskatoon School Board is saying that there's been a cut to funding, but the provincial government is saying that there's been an increase of funding to the Saskatoon Public School Board. Which one is it?
It might be a little bit of both. You know, there's been increases. We've increased operating funds to school divisions by 21% since 2007. And so even if you divide out all the years, that's a significant increase. It's a lot higher than other areas of government have received, other areas of government funding have received. But we have enrollment pressures in Saskatoon. We have them right across the province, but arguably they're most acute in Saskatoon because of the growth we've seen. And so, school boards are trying to adjust to that. On that point, we use numbers, for example, from September 2011 to determine funding for September 2012, the numbers being the enrollment numbers. So we have met with school divisions, and we need to look at the best way to recognize enrollment increases in the current year. So those enrollment numbers, by the way, are not due out until at the end of this weekend, to the end of this month. So we're going to look at options to try to relieve some of the pressures around enrollment that are there. There's no question about it. But we have been increasing funding, not just operationally, Mary, but I think we've been increasing in unprecedented ways, frankly, finally new capital dollars, not just for new schools, but for long-needed renovations that were ignored for too long.
Premier Brad Wall with us. Okay, I have a couple of questions, both on current issues. We didn't get a chance to really get a lot from you because you're just back from China, from Indonesia, from that Southeast station trip, where you were, among other things, referred to as Premier Waldorf in some of the media. So I don't know if you want to be called that now, Premier Waldorf. The economic issue, you talked about this telecom agreement you signed with the Chinese company. What was the other, the other takeaways from this trip for you?
Well, to be clear, it wasn't called Brad Waldorf. It was called Brad Waldorf. So there was a hyphen going in there, but it was in an article and it was great. There's nothing like a good dose of perspective than when you go there. There was another TV show we were on where there was 80 million English viewers in China. It's a Chinese television network, and at the break we were on there for a good 20 minutes talking about Saskatchewan and Western Canada and trying to get our message out, promote what we had to offer. And the host, who's well known there, just completely forgot my name as he went to break, and I had to kind of remind him. And so that was it's all good fun. But it's also productive. These trade missions are crucial. We don't have trade offices like other provinces do around the world. We have one that we share with Alberta and BC and Shanghai. We've decided that it's more cost-effective to get into those markets with ministers supporting our industry. We have the Saskatchewan Trade-Export Partnership going. We had 25 businesses in step with us in this particular mission. There were a number of agreements signed interested in our clean coal technology that's there with respect to the Beijing Environmental Exchange and agreement signed there. University, U of S was there to sign agreements with the Beijing Institute of Technology. The uranium piece is huge. We have in Prime Minister Harper, I think, the first PM to really make uranium access to China's robust nuclear power program a priority. We have a nuclear cooperation agreement we wanted to follow up on. It could mean $3 billion worth of Saskatchewan uranium sold over the next 10 years, perhaps more. That was an important part of the meeting. And then a very important potash agreement that happened in Indonesia, again, a country of 240 million that hasn't had a premier visit it from our province or any other, and yet a country whose imports from Canada are 50% Saskatchewan in terms of fertilizer and food. And there was a potash agreement and a sale, an important one. We can't get into quantities over the next 4 years we're happy to be a part of. So there was a number of things over the 10 days. This is a market for our food and for our fertilizer and for our fuel. And we need to be engaged in that market. It's part of why we have this unique Saskatchewan success story today, is we're diversifying away from a dependence on the U.S. While they'll always be important, but we're going to diversify and focus on these important markets.
Premier Brad Wall, it's Ask the Premier. Next time we speak, I only have a minute left, you're unveiling this economic blueprint document. When's that coming? What can we expect to see?
It'll be next month, and we're going to, again, have more targets. We believe it's important to set targets for our own plan to grow the province and, back it up with measures to get there. It'll focus on infrastructure significantly. We heard from Saskatchewan people that's important, on debt, and also on tax competitiveness and a number of other issues. It'll also be pretty clear in terms of our focus on growth as to what growth pays for. It's one thing to want your jurisdiction to grow and try to implement things that make that happen, or at least get out of the way of it. But we have to remember why we want it to grow. A growing economy allows us to provide better quality of service. It allows us to pay down more debt down the road. It allows us to keep this virtuous circle going, and the plan will be, very much based on that.
Premier, always good having you by. Thank you for this, and look forward to getting you on next month.
Thanks for your time, John. Take care.
Premier Brad Wall. It's Ask the Premier every month here